My name is Isabella Rodriguez, and I'm writing this from my therapist's office after having what my colleagues would probably call a professional breakdown during yesterday's faculty meeting, where I finally exploded after 3 years of enduring daily microaggressions that have been slowly eroding my sanity, self-esteem, and career prospects like water dripping on stone, until the entire foundation of my professional identity collapsed under the weight of 1,000 tiny cuts that everyone insists are either imaginary or insignificant. At 31, I'm an assistant professor of sociology at a prestigious Northeast liberal arts college. I have a PhD from Columbia. My research on immigration and labor rights has been published in top-tier journals, yet I spend most days feeling like I'm slowly disappearing under the accumulated weight of comments, assumptions, and behaviors that individually seem harmless but collectively create a hostile environment that makes me question my competence, my sanity, and my right to exist in academic spaces. The microaggressions began on my first day of work at Whitmore College, starting with the administrative assistant who repeatedly mispronounced my last name despite multiple corrections, each incorrect pronunciation feeling like a small erasure of my identity and heritage. When I politely corrected her pronunciation for the 4th time, she sighed and said, "Can I just call you Isabella? These ethnic names are so complicated." As if my surname was an unreasonable burden, she was being forced to accommodate rather than a basic aspect of my identity that deserved the same respect given to colleagues named Kowalski, Johansson, or Papadopoulos. The assumptions about my qualifications started during my first faculty meeting when the department chair introduced me as their diversity hire, who would bring multicultural perspectives to their curriculum, language that immediately marked me as different from my white colleagues who were introduced by their research specializations and academic achievements. The implication was clear. I was there to fulfill demographic requirements rather than contribute scholarly expertise, and my research on labor organizing among undocumented workers was valuable primarily for its representation rather than its intellectual rigor. The physical boundary violations became routine, as colleagues would touch my hair without permission, commenting on its texture and asking whether it was natural or if I used special products to achieve my curly style. These invasions of my personal space were always accompanied by compliments about how exotic or interesting my hair looked, as if I should be grateful for the attention rather than violated by the unwanted touching and racialized commentary that treated my body as public property available for inspection and discussion. The questioning of my expertise took subtle forms that were difficult to document but impossible to ignore, like colleagues who would ask me to cite sources for factual statements that white faculty members made without challenge, or who would express surprise when my research methodology was rigorous and my theoretical framework was sophisticated. During one departmental seminar, a senior professor interrupted my presentation 3 times to ask for clarification on basic concepts that he wouldn't have questioned if they came from a white colleague, treating me like a graduate student rather than a peer with equivalent credentials and experience. The language policing was constant and exhausting as colleagues would comment on my accent, even though I was born in New Jersey and spoke English as my first language, or compliment me on being so articulate with the kind of surprised tone that revealed their low expectations for Latina professional communication. When I code-switched into Spanish during phone conversations with family or community members, colleagues would make jokes about not understanding secret conversations or ask me to translate casual exchanges that had nothing to do with them or our work. The cultural competency assumptions place the burden of explaining all Latino issues on me regardless of my actual research expertise or personal background, as if my ethnic identity made me qualified to speak about every aspect of Hispanic culture from Mexico to Argentina. During curriculum meetings, colleagues would turn to me for input on the Latino perspective on topics ranging from literature to economics, treating me as a representative of an entire continental population rather than an individual scholar with specific areas of knowledge and research interests. The social exclusion was subtle but systematic as informal networking opportunities and career-advancing relationships developed through casual interactions that somehow never included me. Colleagues would make lunch plans or organize coffee meetings in my presence without extending invitations, or would schedule important conversations immediately after formal meetings ended, creating insider networks that influenced hiring decisions, research collaborations, and promotion recommendations while maintaining plausible deniability about deliberate exclusion. The research dismissal took the form of comments that my work on immigration was too political or advocacy rather than scholarship, criticism that was never applied to colleagues studying other social justice issues or policy implications of their research. My methodology was subjected to scrutiny that white colleagues' work didn't receive, and my findings were characterized as biased toward immigrant communities rather than objectively analytical, as if studying marginalized populations automatically compromised scholarly neutrality. The teaching evaluations reflected student biases that penalized me for not conforming to stereotypical expectations about Latina femininity and authority, with comments about my being intimidating or aggressive when I maintained the same classroom standards and professional demeanor as my white colleagues. Students would challenge my expertise more frequently and directly than they did with other professors, asking about my qualifications and background in ways that suggested doubt about my legitimacy in the classroom. The family pressure added another layer of stress, as relatives who were proud of my academic achievements couldn't understand why I seemed increasingly unhappy and anxious about work that looked successful from the outside. When I tried to explain microaggressions and their cumulative impact, family members would suggest that I was being too sensitive or looking for problems in situations that seemed minor compared to the overt discrimination they had experienced in blue-collar jobs or service industries. The gaslighting became overwhelming as colleagues would deny or minimize incidents when I tried to address them, suggesting that I was misinterpreting innocent comments or reading racist intentions into normal workplace interactions. The phrase, "I'm sure they didn't mean it that way," became a constant refrain that invalidated my experiences while protecting perpetrators from accountability for the impact of their words and actions on my psychological well-being and professional environment. The breaking point came during a faculty meeting about diversity initiatives when a colleague suggested that the department was already diverse enough because they had hired me, reducing my entire professional identity to my demographic contribution rather than acknowledging my scholarly achievements or intellectual contributions. When I tried to explain why this comment was problematic, another colleague interrupted to say that I was playing the race card and making everyone walk on eggshells around racial issues. The explosion that followed was 3 years of accumulated frustration, exhaustion, and professional invalidation pouring out in an uncontrolled torrent of anger and pain that shocked my colleagues and probably confirmed their stereotypes about emotional Latina women who couldn't handle professional environments. I found myself crying and shouting simultaneously, trying to explain how daily microaggressions had been destroying my mental health, while colleagues stared at me with the kind of uncomfortable silence that suggested they viewed my breakdown as evidence of instability rather than a predictable response to chronic mistreatment. The aftermath was professionally devastating as word of my outburst spread through academic networks where emotional regulation and composed professionalism are valued above authenticity or justice. Some colleagues expressed concern for my well-being, while others suggested that I might be struggling with the pressures of academia in ways that implied personal inadequacy rather than institutional problems that had contributed to my psychological distress. The therapy that began immediately after the meeting was with Dr. Carmen Martinez, a Latina psychologist who specialized in treating minority professionals dealing with workplace microaggressions and racial trauma. She helped me understand that my breakdown wasn't evidence of emotional instability, but a normal response to chronic stress created by constant invalidation and psychological assault that would have affected anyone's mental health and professional functioning. Microaggressions are called micro because each individual incident seems small, but they're actually quite powerful when they accumulate over time, Dr. Martinez explained during our first session. Think of it like radiation exposure. Each dose might seem harmless, but cumulative exposure creates serious damage that affects every aspect of your health and functioning. Your reaction wasn't oversensitive, it was your mind and body trying to protect you from continued harm. The healing process involved learning to identify and document microaggressions as they occurred rather than dismissing them as minor incidents that I should ignore or tolerate. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that trusting my own perceptions was crucial for mental health, even when others minimized or denied the discriminatory nature of their behavior. I learned to separate my legitimate responses to mistreatment from the gaslighting that suggested my experiences weren't real or significant. The coping strategies included developing scripts for responding to common microaggressions in ways that asserted my dignity without escalating conflicts that might further damage my professional relationships. I practiced setting boundaries around physical touching, correcting mispronunciations of my name, and redirecting conversations that assumed I could speak for all Latino people based on my ethnic identity rather than my actual expertise in research. The support network building included connecting with other faculty of color through organizations like the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, where I found mentorship and solidarity with academics who had experienced similar workplace challenges. These relationships provided validation that my experiences were common rather than unique, and they offered strategies for navigating hostile environments while protecting mental health and career advancement. The documentation system I developed involved keeping detailed records of microaggressive incidents, including dates, witnesses, and specific language used, creating evidence that could support formal complaints if the behavior escalated or if I decided to pursue legal action. The documentation also helped me track patterns and identify colleagues whose behavior was consistently problematic rather than occasionally insensitive. The advocacy work that emerged from my experience included writing and speaking about microaggressions in academic settings and the impact of cumulative bias on faculty of color's career outcomes and mental health. I collaborated with other scholars to research the connection between workplace microaggressions and academic burnout, contributing to literature that validated experiences many minority professionals had endured in isolation. The policy changes I advocated for included mandatory bias training for all faculty, clear procedures for reporting and addressing microaggressions, and accountability measures for colleagues whose behavior created hostile environments for minority faculty. I worked with administration to develop bystander intervention training that empowered witnesses to interrupt microaggressive behavior rather than remaining silent when they observed discriminatory treatment. The career recovery involved rebuilding professional relationships while maintaining boundaries that protected my mental health and dignity. Some colleagues made genuine efforts to understand how their behavior had been harmful and to change their interactions with me and other faculty of color. Others continued to minimize or deny the impact of microaggressions, requiring me to limit professional interactions while focusing on relationships with more supportive colleagues and external collaborators. Today, I continue working at Whitmore College while also serving as a consultant on faculty diversity and inclusion for other academic institutions. The work involves helping colleges understand how microaggressions undermine their diversity goals and providing training that helps faculty recognize and interrupt bias in their interactions with colleagues and students. Key resources and solutions that made the difference. The National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity provides mentorship, networking, and professional development resources for faculty of color dealing with workplace bias and career advancement challenges. Therapy with culturally competent providers who understand racial trauma and workplace discrimination helps individuals process the psychological impact of microaggressions and develop healthy coping strategies. Documentation systems for tracking bias incidents provide evidence that can support formal complaints and help individuals identify patterns of discriminatory behavior that might not be obvious from isolated incidents. Bystander intervention training empowers witnesses to interrupt microaggressive behavior when they observe it, creating more supportive workplace environments for minorities who often face discrimination in isolation. Professional organizations for minority academics provide peer support, networking opportunities, and advocacy platforms for addressing systematic bias in higher education and other professional settings. Legal consultation services help individuals understand their rights and options when workplace microaggressions escalate to levels that might constitute hostile work environment or discrimination claims. Bias training programs for organizations address unconscious prejudice and provide tools for creating more inclusive workplace cultures that prevent rather than respond to discriminatory behavior. Mental health resources specifically addressing racial trauma and chronic stress help minorities process the cumulative impact of microaggressions on psychological well-being and professional functioning. Today, when I meet other minorities who are dealing with microaggressions and wondering whether they're overreacting to seemingly minor incidents, I tell them to trust their instincts and understand that their experiences are valid even when others minimize or deny them. Microaggressions are designed to be subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability while still causing real psychological harm, and your emotional reactions are normal responses to chronic mistreatment. documenting incidents, seeking support from others who understand, and prioritizing your mental health are crucial for surviving and thriving despite environments that undermine your dignity and worth through constant small attacks.